Here we go, you admirable, you damnable accursed. First, I'm not healthy today, but really first, I want to wish the Toronto Argonauts a hearty congratulations on their stunning Grey Cup win last night, and remind all of you accursed, never take any betting advice from me. Called it completely wrong. All right, the panel is here, primed with political insights and ready to put the cuss back and discuss. Scott Reid, Jordan Leichnitz, Kory Teneycke has returned from his gig as the Rakuten Santa, and me. Here's the rundown for the next hour. We're heading west to BC to talk about shifts in that political landscape. David Eby is in as the premier, and he's going to hit the ground running. Those are his words. BC United has risen from the ashes of the BC Liberal Party. What does this rebrand mean? Is it a case of cosmetics, new name, new logo, or new thinking, new direction? And what does it mean for the alignment of BC politics? Our cursed clipping is Susan Delacourte's piece in The Star, teeing up the last week of the Emergencies Act hearings. We'll look back at Brenda Lucky's eyebrow-raising testimony and anticipate Trudeau's appearance this week. And then China. The Xi video, of course. What do we make of that?
China.
What? China. Why isn't the government answering questions about alleged interference in the election, and what are the domestic political implications of where our relationship with China is headed? By then, it'll be time for Gordon Pinsent to close the show with our Hey Yous. All right. Jordan, Kory, Scott, how are you today? How's your weekend?
It was great. Relaxing.
Yeah? Great and relaxing. Okay.
Yeah.
Jordan, you?
Tobogganing season has begun, so I'm a happy camper. This is the good stuff with small children. So we have enough snow finally in Ottawa, and it will be thus for the next 6 months.
Crazy carpet mom? Yeah.
Are there still crazy carpets?
There are. Yeah, definitely.
Are they just as dangerous? Like
absolutely
broken bones in their wake?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, only if you do it right. Yeah, we're trying to stay away from the hospital, but other than that, this is like fun for the whole family.
When they focus grouped the original name, Certain Death, it didn't work as well. So they went to Crazy Carpet and they found sales improved. I had a great weekend. I spent it in
handles at the back so they can double as a stretcher.
I spent the weekend in beautiful Barrie, Ontario at a hockey tournament. The boys were, smashing onto the ice. They had to play a team that was 1 year older than they had to play 15-year-olds. Most of them were only 13. So there was a lot of lessons handed out this weekend.
I was going to say that's a good life preparation thing there.
Yeah, and then we almost got chased.
If you live through it.
Well, a couple of guys it was pretty rough actually. And then I got to spend some time with the Grey Cup with my friend David Herle, who's an enthusiastic CFL fan. So it was a pretty swell weekend.
Yeah.
Except I had bet heavily, and I mean heavily, on Winnipeg, who I thought to be a certain lock. And therefore, I'm going to have to renegotiate some loan action.
Turns out the Argo defense came to play last night.
Yeah, well, the line of credit interest rates are increasing, and so that's going to cause some trouble. It'll come about April for me as a consequence of last night's surprise come from behind victory for the goddamn Argonauts.
Jordan, you're looking very patient through all this. I gather meant nothing to you.
Well, the amount of spare time in my life right now is pretty much filled by this lovely podcast. So
what?
You guys are my recreation.
What a terrible, damning statement on your life. This is how you choose to spend the few spare moments you have in your calendar. Good Lord.
Oh God. Okay, so let's get going so that Jordan can have some fun in her spare time. So everybody was talking about the Xi Trudeau video and the confrontation that happened there. Kory, what did you see in that video? When you looked at it as a political practitioner, what did you see?
Well, I think it depends. I think you saw what you wanted to see. Like, I think for people who wanted to see the prime minister, standing firm, I think you could see that if you wanted to. If you wanted to see it as Trudeau bungling a foreign affairs issue, you could see it that way too if you wanted to. Like, I think that's why in a lot of the commentary, you're seeing it very bifurcated into strong different camps. What I find more interesting and in some ways troubling about the whole China thing is the lack of transparency around not just the issues related to foreign interference in an election, but also if we go all the way back to the pandemic stuff around the controversy with some people being shown the door from China at our lab out in Winnipeg that deals with viruses and biological issues. I wonder why the government just isn't more forthright, because I think they're getting a lot of criticism from quarters that normally are more supportive of them. Like I see Andrew Coyne and others that are taking up the reins on this. I don't know why they wouldn't just come out and practice good issues management here and put everything out in the public realm. Like, they didn't interfere in the election. The Liberal government didn't. I'd be shocked if they were participants in that in any way, shape, or form. I think we all got to give them credit that that's very unlikely. So why not just put it out there? Why not answer the questions as fully as possible? It's very difficult for me to understand the argument to do anything other than that.
Yeah, I really want to get it. That's a good point, and I'm curious about it too, and I really want to get into it. But there's just a couple things, team, about this video that I'm still curious about. First of all, can somebody clear this up for me? Because it seems unclear to people, at least on Twitter. Was this a routine readout of a meeting between the leaders, or did the government leak a private conversation? This seems to matter. What was it?
Yeah, well, I don't know, Scott, do you want to do that? But both you and I have written a number of these. A generally good protocol is that there's some sort of back and forth with the country that you're doing the readout on, where there's some level of awareness or negotiation that's going on in terms of what's actually going to go out. It's not like in other countries approving what your readout is going to be, but there's at least some informal interaction around what it is that's going to be put in the public realm and what isn't. And so clearly that didn't happen because the reaction from the Chinese is quite intense. But clearly China felt it was out of bounds. It didn't look out of bounds to me.
Scott?
My reading is this. First of all, it was a pull aside, right? So as they sort of say, so you have a bilateral meeting that's scheduled, for which both sides have Sherpas preparing notes and agenda items, all that kind of stuff. That's not what this was. This was a pull aside, which is if you can't secure a bilateral, you don't wish to secure a bilateral, then you have what they call a pull aside, where you just quickly conference on the side of a summit or a meeting. And often the usual protocol is that those also merit a readout. And I suspect it reflects on the answer that you want, David, about was somebody breaching protocol? My suspicion is there's no clear answer on that. It reflects the dysfunctionality of the relationship, because as Kory says, you wouldn't permit another country to approve what the content of your readout, but it would be two things would be clear. One is that there would be one, and two, there'd be a general sense of, okay, so when we talk to our media, we're going to be sort of acknowledging it's this, this, and this, and this. And my suspicion is that the level of trust between the two countries is so low that we just operated on the natural assumption that it would be a readout, and we didn't engage in that discussion, probably because we didn't want to surrender ourselves to their objection to say, no, there will be no readout, which I think would surely have been China's instinct, and fuck that. So I think they just went ahead and did a readout, and then he objected to it. I also think there's some theater in Xi's reaction. If this was the Americans, he wouldn't do it, right? The whole world is moving in on him. Now, they maybe don't care as much about that, but the whole world is moving in on him. The West is boxing them. And I think, he can punch at Canada in the way that he can't punch at the United States. And so I think we caught a little bit of his reaction and aggression to that.
He blew off the UK too, though, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Jordan, last question on the video. Do you think Trudeau looked strong in that video?
Yeah, I don't think it was terrible for him. I think that, in the initial parts of the video, his body language obviously is a little bit more, he's listening, he's nodding, but it's all happening through an interpreter too, which I think provides a bit of the lag. But you do see him, and again, if you turn the sound off, what does it look like? You do see him take a little bit more of an aggressive stance towards the end of the conversation. Overall, I don't think it's that bad for him, to be honest. I think, broadly speaking, he was doing there what Canadians kind of expect him to do in that sort of an encounter. I think his far bigger problem is what's happening in Canada and just the government's seeming lack of urgency and lack of response around some of the issues involving China. So we're hearing now that he was never briefed on the potential election interference, on who it was. Things are not really adding up. And I think...
Well, I have a really dumb question, Jordan, if I could just jump in with you. I have a really dumb question, which is, if he doesn't know which candidates were involved in the election interference, and if he's never been briefed on the subject, then what did he raise with Xi? A global TV news report? Like, seriously, what was the conversation about?
Did you read it that way? Because I thought there was some pretty heavy Clintonian parsing going on, and what his response was that he hasn't been briefed that any of these people have been influenced by China. Is sort of how I read it.
No, I read it as he hasn't been told exactly who they are, which is two different.
I don't know. I wouldn't be as definitive on that. Mm-hmm. But in my reading, but who knows? But this is a government who, we're watching time and time again, is pretty cute with the truth on these sorts of things. Like if you're, which we'll get into more with Brenda Lucki, I'm sure. Is that the case? I don't know. We'll see.
I think the problem politically for him here, though, is really that, this isn't in a vacuum, right? The election interference is after the reports about the potential police stations that China's running in Canada, which is after reports about MPs being, and expats being pressured on issues, by agents of the Chinese government, which is after Huawei, which is out, and so on, right? So we now have a number of really strong examples of the Chinese government operating on Canadian soil in a way that I think is quite problematic. And I think most Canadians would agree is quite problematic. And the government response seems to be a bit of a shrug and a duck. And I don't think that's going to last for much longer.
Well, let me, by the way, on the parsing thing, I think it's possible you're both wrong, but fundamentally right? Like, I think Kory might be wrong in what his interpretation, Jordan, you might be wrong in your interpretation, I might be wrong in mine, but what's clearly correct is that they were parsing, so whatever, like, it's not conceivable that there was no awareness whatsoever, no briefing. Maybe it was something less formal than a briefing. I don't know, but it's not possible that he wasn't conscious that something was going on. I think it's entirely likely that he wouldn't know what specific candidates. That's quite possible that would not have been handed over.
Well, but here's the Prime Minister. Why wouldn't he ask now? Like, isn't that a cheesy, cheap, and unsatisfactory answer to begin with? Like,
but your assumption is that
even if that's true, and he's not parsing, who fucking cares? Who are they? Ask now. Get the briefing now. You're still a prime minister. These people still work for you. They're still your intelligence agents. So who the fuck are they?
Well, this takes me to my broader point, though, which is I think, and I don't want to overly defend the government on this point, but I do think we should acknowledge, because we've all been in government, I think, at least you and I have been, Kory, right? Like, technically in the prime minister's office. And I think we should just, take 1 second. And then I'll go on and I'll bitch and moan about what I don't like. But let's just take 1 second to acknowledge the fundamental complexity of this issue and this issue set and this relationship. Okay, so when it comes to why the hell don't they just say everything and lay everything on the table? Well, there's a whole variety of reasons. There may be very valid bilateral national security reasons. There may be multilateral security reasons. We may be getting pressure from other Western powers to be careful about what we do and don't disclose. We may have found out certain things from other powers, and therefore we don't have full discretion to disclose everything. So it's not just as easy as saying, okay, well, I went to the grocery store and I'm going to empty the bag out on the kitchen table afterwards. So I think let's just be a little, I think just a little acknowledgement. That being said, where my complaint would be is I think that there needs to be I think it would be in the government's interest, and I don't want to turn it all into tactics, but Kory mentioned the phrase issues management, so I'll pick it up. From an issues management perspective, I think indicating, even at a high level, look, here's the deal. It is a multilateral and bilateral relationship. It is incredibly complex. We are dealing with a regime that basically fucking jailed illegally two of our citizens and does so to other nations. And so, the truth of the matter is there are going to be things that we will be 100% transparent about and we will explain. There will be some things that we won't be at liberty to discuss in full. But here's where our compass is on these issues. Here's what we're about and not about on those issues. I think, at least like I always say to clients when it comes to issues management, if you can't explain something, explain that you can't explain it. And if you can't explain why you can't explain it, fucking explain that, which is obviously clear as mud advice, but I hope the government takes it.
Sure. But at the end of the day, is it not the most probable answer to why they are not saying who they are is that the people affected are members of their caucus? Or mostly members of their caucus? I
don't think that at all. I would not make that assumption one bit. I think that would be a dangerous assumption.
Well, then I think there's certainly a perception out there that that's part of it, and that this is going to look bad on them.
Which doesn't help you a bit if you're not at liberty to discuss it because of maybe how you obtained that information. It doesn't help you if people are suspicious.
Okay, Jordan, you actually work for an international think tank, so let me draw on you here. One of the things that confuses me when I watch this is that the government does some things that do seem hostile to the Chinese, and the Chinese don't react at all. So we cancel a bunch of contracts for critical minerals. Champagne says you can't do that, and your economic interest is dismissed. You're out just on the basis of we don't like you. We don't like the cut of your jib. And there's no real reaction to that. But yet you say something about interference, and the leader of China is berating your prime minister, and you're afraid to talk about the lab in Winnipeg for some reason or other. So what do they react to? What don't they react to? What's going on?
Well, I mean, I think it would be wrong to say that they're not reacting. I think the reaction is sometimes coming in these more clandestine efforts coming from China. And there is for sure a scorecard kept on this stuff. So I think the Chinese are absolutely taking counteractions every time they feel slighted. And I wouldn't make the assumption that there's no reaction on their part. But I mean, the reality is like Kory and Scott are both right here in the sense that there are certainly going to be things that the government can't say, likely because of shared intelligence for the most part. But on the other hand, they still have a political problem. There's no story that they're telling about their response to China that makes sense to voters. They have to, I think, really come up with a narrative about how they're reacting to these, what are really threats to the integrity of the Canadian democratic system, to the Chinese Canadian expat community. Like, people are living this stuff. And until they can tell a story about how they're on it, that includes perhaps why they can't share some of those broader details, I think that they have a real political problem because, as Kory rightly points out, people are going to assume the worst about things like election interference and about who's impacted on it.
And the story they're telling so far, I really don't like. So let me. No,
I think it's a weak story.
Well, I have a specific beef about it as a former comms director, and I don't know if you'll share this perspective, having held the same post, Kory, but I don't like the way they're handling the Indo-Pacific strategy. I don't like the way that they're preconditioning it. I mean, to me, what they've signaled is, one, they're a monster economic power that we can't ignore. We're going to have to continue to work with them and engage with them on a trade basis. Two, their behavior is increasingly hostile, and therefore we're going to have to speak out against them and not be curbed as much and as often as we were in the past by those economic considerations. And three, if that harms your business from a private sector standpoint, then just be advised in advance. Okay, that's great. But they've been telling us they're going to tell us this for 4 weeks, and they keep building it up. And it is a doctrine of the spectacularly obvious. And it is not that grave a variation from the status quo. So why you would be telling people, wait for this 20-page document that's going to have charts and beautiful graphs, like they are actually intensifying their political problem, I think, by being non-transparent about the challenges and then promising that this thing is going to be the remedy. as though it's some kind of unbelievable solution when I just can't believe, maybe they'll shock me, but I can't believe it's going to be that much more sensationally, spectacularly insightful than what we've heard already. So why don't they just release the goddamn thing instead of keep talking about it and building it up?
They can't release that until they've dealt with some of these other things, right? Like they can't pretend to have a day on the Indo-Pacific strategy and not be prepared to ask any questions about these other matters.
But they're not going to have those things fixed in the next 2 weeks, David. So they're going to have to face those questions no matter when they release this thing. And a good part of the answer is not telling people, wait till you get this paper, because holy smokes, man, it's this year's model. It's a 1965 Mustang, and it's a fucking breathtaking thing to watch. Wait till you'll see it.
Low-hanging fruit. All hurly-burlyites know this metaphor. We've probably used it. But despite its undeniable accuracy, I've always found it to be slightly off-putting. I mean, I just don't want my mind to wander to pears or figs in the middle of a strategic discussion. But I'll go with it here because I think it applies to our conversation on how long-term digital policy should be playing a big role in Canada's climate policy. Currently, it's not playing any role. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, believes digital policy is climate policy. It just seems unlikely that we can meet net zero emissions by 2050 unless the positive enabling role of digital technology is not only recognized but expanded upon. Our own behaviors are naturally headed in this direction. Think about how we're accessing healthcare. According to the Canadian Institute for Health Information, 73% of us had at least one virtual healthcare interaction at home. Those numbers are only on the rise. Almost 16% of us are working exclusively from home now, according to Stats Can, and 1.7 million Canadians have hybrid work arrangements. We're taking so many more of our classes online. Supply of electric vehicles can't meet current demand. And 51% of Canadian consumers shop online at least monthly, based on a 2022 survey by PwC. See, these are the low-hanging, carbon-reducing wins that TELUS believes can be amplified with the flawless connectivity and innovation that world-leading digital policy brings. But to take full advantage of this opportunity, Canada needs to lead our global peers by including digital policy as a foundational piece of our climate action plan so that we can reach our climate targets. To learn more about this kind of thinking and to support it, go to telus.com/digital policy for climate. Okay. All right, folks, it is a big week this week at the Ottawa inquiry, the inquiry into the Ottawa occupation, the protests. Trudeau's at the inquiry this week. His chief of staff, Katie Telford's there. Chrystia Freeland's there. Marco Mendicino is there, all testifying. In terms of the public verdict, it feels to me like this thing is over, and people have made up their minds about this thing. I don't know what could change anymore. Susan Delacourt has our clipping of the week in the Toronto Star today, in which she basically says this is the opportunity for the occupiers, the protesters, to have the conversation with the Prime Minister and his government that they never got to have on the streets of Ottawa. She says, the Prime Minister may well be asked this week what made him reject the idea of negotiation with the convoy. Was it that the idea was doomed, or was it that there was no one coherent set of leaders or demands? Or was Trudeau just loath to sit down with people who were flying fuck Trudeau flags and calling for him to be deposed or worse? Scott, what could happen this week that might still matter on this?
I think lots of things. And from a substantive standpoint, I mean, the government is going to have to, at every single one of these appearances, they will, if nothing else, be asked to rationalize the technical decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. What was the technical legal basis for that decision? What caused you to cross out all other alternatives to be driven to that? And so they're going to have to manage that technical answer without falling, in my view, so I'm now maybe tending into giving advice, but without falling into the trap of being too technical, and so I think they're going to, and by that I mean, look, it was 3.5 weeks. There was a policing failure. It had trended into a political failure. We weren't going to permit it to become a broader public policy failure, and therefore, we invoked the act. And, they're going to get pushed and all that stuff. I think one of the interesting things is you just don't get to see people under oath in this way. You don't get to see senior staff, ministers, a prime minister. We prepped Paul for Gomery. That was only the second time in history. This will be the third time in history a prime minister has testified at a judicial inquiry under oath. And so, if nothing else, you want to make certain, if you're one of those ministers and the prime minister, that you don't mess up, that you don't fire the puck on your own net. And so careful preparation. It isn't question period, right? It's not a setting like something else, right? You got to prepare for this, I think, really, really carefully. Know exactly where you want to go, where you don't want to go. Be carefully aware of the vulnerability points. I would say this is a no improvisation zone, and you should be thinking like that. And people should have been rehearsing all weekend long and every day this week. And by the way, the prime minister has the toughest job because he bats cleanup, which is an interesting little small scheduling fact, right? So if any of his ministers fuck up or leave dangling threads, he's got to come in and clean all of that up and sweep all that up. So that's not a small task. And people will obsess over small shit, as we see on this thing, right? And then the final thing, and we'll get to it later, I'll just park it for now. Jesus Christ, Brenda Lucki. Wow. And so Marco in particular is going to be under the glare. It's how could it be that the RCMP commissioner, even though she didn't get onto the cabinet docket that day, she didn't get a speaking slot? How can it be that you were unconscious of what was inside her head and what her planning was?
Well, it just seems, it defies belief. Yeah. It defies belief that she was sitting there at the table, and leaving aside whether she should have spoken up, probably, although I don't really know what the dynamic of a cabinet table is, but probably she should have spoken up. But even still, it defies belief that nobody in the cabinet at any point looked over to her and said, hey, just out of curiosity, what do you think? I don't even understand that. Well, but to Scott's point about how this week's going to go, Kory, I was interested in his take on it because it feels to me like people don't really care about whether the invocation of the act was justified or not. They have a point of view about whether it should have been used, and they don't. And when the discussions about the technical qualifications for the act, the government's losing. But when they're talking about the big picture of there was a big crisis in the country and it wasn't getting fixed until we did this and we fixed it, they're winning. Yeah. Is that all right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But there are a few things here and they're related. So, why did things go down the way with Brenda Lucki last week, and then on these other things, whether it's the Nova Scotia shooting or anything else? Here's a theory for you. It's because she's fucking incompetent. How about that?
It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to not come to that conclusion. I mean, we're all pretty goddamn smart, but I think even other people spotted it.
If she's got evidence to the contrary, it's time for her to unveil it.
Yeah,
it really
well, except every time she seems to take the stand in any of these things, she provides another whole newspaper's worth of columns citing that in fact the conclusion is that she is fucking incompetent, and she's far from the only RCMP commissioner in recent history to have that conclusion kind of be fairly obviously printed on the front page of every newspaper. So I think it speaks to what the actual truth of the situation is, and it's that the police had ample powers to deal with these protests. The fact that politicians felt pushed into a corner where they had to invoke the Emergency Act is because they wouldn't use them. If you have them, why aren't you using them? If you have everything you need, why aren't you doing it? And the answer is very, very opaque. I kind of keep coming back to
that's why the people that argue that you shouldn't have invoked the Emergencies Act are losing, because you can you say all you want that we didn't need the powers, but you weren't solving the fucking problem.
Yeah, both points are true.
That's right.
Do you need the powers in the Emergency Act to clear the protest? Clearly no, you don't. So why wasn't it happening? Well, because some combination of Chief Slowly and Chief Brenda Lucki are incompetent, or they're just not interested in doing their job. If the police are not interested in doing their job, then and the politicians aren't allowed to direct them, operationally and say, go and clean up this protest, then you're left with these, series of very bad options in front of you. And the ultimate hammer on it is, all right, we're going to take the you don't have enough powers argument off the table completely. Here's the Emergencies Act. We're basically just declaring martial law. We're suspending civil liberties. You can go and remove these people by whatever means you deem necessary, but we're taking off the table any excuse for not doing so because this has gone on too long. And I think that's kind of the truth of what happened. So, both sides are correct to an extent. And the person who, I think the person, people, organizations, institutions that are looking terrible in this, it's our police services, which is unfortunate. But what do I hope the recommendations coming out of this will be is more leeway for politicians to actually direct the police on a policy basis as opposed to an operational basis to deal with these sorts of things, create a clear laneway for that to happen, and some fucking accountability for the police.
Jordan, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be in violent agreement with Kory all the time, but in this case, I do agree. I mean, I think between Lucky and Slowly, they've done more for the defund the police argument than anybody else in recent memory in Canada. What's really been on display here is just the stunning disconnect and disinterest on the part of both police forces in reacting to this threat. And I think that if anything, it's actually created more public sympathy for the federal government's decision on the Emergencies Act than anything else. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if Lucky's career is the real casualty of this inquiry, I think that would probably be a bit of justice here. But what I'm interested in this week, I think this is really where the format of the inquiry is going to be interesting. These are long testimonies. Lucky was on the stand for 8 hours. This is the intensity and the duration of the testimony is another thing that can really lead people into error. So when you've got those ministers up there for such a long period where the details really matter, I think that the stakes are pretty high. And I think, I think about Marco Mendicino, right? So he's already been on the or he's, in the early disclosures, he's been suggesting that police asked for these powers. Well, now, we know that isn't really the case. In fact, it was quite the opposite. They were saying that they didn't need them. So yeah. I expect to see a pretty deep plumbing of some of those things that probably won't ultimately look too great for the government, particularly when you layer it on top of some of the dysfunctional stuff that Lucky has shared about those cabinet meetings and basic communication stuff not happening. At the end of the day, I think the picture that this paints for Canadians is one of a government that did not, for whatever reason, have its shit together with the police forces in order to have an effective response. So I think it's created empathy for their decision to do this, but I don't think anybody really comes out looking good on this.
So I want to take a moment this week to talk about one of those people who bend history to their will. They walk among us, but they don't think like most of us. Charles Melville Hayes was one of those people. He was a railroader, born in the mid-19th century, and he died young. More on that in a moment. He started at age 17 as a clerk in St. Louis, Missouri. And as he rose through the industry, he conceived a great matter: establishment of a second transcontinental railroad in Canada, one that would run from the Maritimes to the West Coast, not to Vancouver, but to the northern BC town of Prince Rupert. Rupert is much closer to Asia than Vancouver. It also has the benefit of not being surrounded by a metropolis, so there's a lot more room to build out the infrastructure befitting an important seaport. Charles Melville Hayes pestered everyone, twisted arms, cut deals, and bought up land. His aggressive style landed him in the president's office at Grand Trunk Pacific Railway. Ottawa grew tired of him, but eventually struck a deal. A new line would be built from Winnipeg to Rupert. He died before it was finished, though. In 1912, he was in London, England, and anxious to get back to Canada for the official opening of the Chateau Laurier in Ottawa. He boarded a ship from London to New York, joining the chairman of the White Star Shipping Company on board the RMS Titanic. He was last seen helping women onto the great ocean liner's lifeboats. They paused construction of the second railroad for 5 whole minutes in his honor, but it was eventually built. And Rupert today is a gem in the network of CN, our sponsor. Along with Vancouver, it is a crucial link to Asian markets. To say CN has great plans for Rupert is a gross understatement. Charles Melville Hayes, as I said, made a difference. Most Canadians might have never heard of him, but he affected our economy and therefore our lives profoundly. The city of Melville, Saskatchewan is named after him. Not bad for a former railroad clerk. So is the city of Hayesport, British Columbia. And in Prince Rupert, where folks know what he accomplished, there's a school named for him and a statue. He's wearing a three-piece suit and a fedora, and he looks entrepreneurial. Hayes' new cargo has to move, and boy, did he make that happen. The irony is that, the Mendocino argument at the beginning about the police forces having asked for it was indicative, I thought, of the government didn't want to own the decision. The government wanted to be seen to have been backed into the decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. And the irony is now that their only way through it is to fully embrace it as their own decision.
Yeah, they have to.
And always should have been their instinct. Can I just say two quick last things? One, to Kory's point about police and the command structure of the police. I think that that's so important. I'll be shocked if that's not one of the big principal findings out of this thing. Like, often the story of these things is unsexy and uninteresting, right? And I think slowly not wanting to surrender command, control, and other police forces not really understanding, like, no matter the deterioration of the situation, what would be the trigger that would permit them to say, just move aside, asshole, right? Like in every movie we've ever seen, right? John McClane comes in and says, who's in charge? All right, you're fucking fired. Now I'm in charge. Like, but that's not how it works in the real world. And that paralyzed them. So that 3.5 weeks later, she's saying, well, I had a secret policing plan. I just hadn't had a chance to tell anybody about it or to do anything with it. The other thing is on Jordan's point.
And why not, though? Like, and this is the question. Yeah. Like, so you were sitting on a plan to deal with all of this, and you could have done it. Like,
what other spectacular rubies and jewels you have hidden from us? But Jordan's point,
you hit it. She was waiting for John McClane. Like that's clearly the answer here. Like I don't know. Like it just defies any reasonable look at the situation to say, like, so you have a plan and you have basically limitless resources. And so what the fuck were you waiting for?
Yeah, it's the other thing I want to underline.
Of the Emergencies Act, what was it? What was going to be the button that would, mark go or start that was going to have you hit that button?
They didn't have an answer. I just want to say Jordan's point about 8 hours of testimony, like it's so important. So in the world of this coming out on Monday night, this podcast, I know, that there are staffers that listen to this thing. I am begging you, if you work for a minister that's going to be at this thing, right, do not spend 45 minutes of a paper exercise where you sit around a boardroom table and say, Minister, these are the 3 or 4 general points of concern you're going to have to face, blah, blah, blah. Make sure you read through your material. Don't do that. Right? This thing is like, this is a Stanley Kubrick film, right? They're going to do 67, 101, 191 takes on the same issue. So you have got to be prepared. You got to put yourself in a position this week to like literally be fatigued as you're answering these questions, because that's what's going to take to avoid stepping in a bear trap. And there are bear traps on this issue. So prep prudently, prep for the room, prep for the event. And that means like actually just sitting and pretending to mock this thing out for hours on end. Clear your calendars, people. Nothing fucking matters as much as not getting this wrong. Getting this wrong could be a career-ending move.
All right. Can I loop back to Susan's piece just to close the circle on this conversation? Because this still seems to rattle around out there, and it provoked Susan to write about it. Is there anybody in this panel who would have advised the Prime Minister to meet with the protesters?
Never.
No fucking way.
No, of course not.
No fucking way. But I would have said no fucking way. And here's why. And it wouldn't be because I get bruised that they're saying fuck me. It's because I'm not going to have a dialogue with people who think that they can undemocratically supplant the democratic government. And they're using it by force. I mean, I sound like a bureaucrat now, but the precedent.
But they were holding a
ridiculous.
city hostage. That's crazy.
Yeah.
They're holding
this is exactly the right point. And you got to take the politics out of this. So for all the conservatives are out there who think that that's somehow carrying water for the Liberals or vice versa, like you got to remember that different parties are going to be in government in different provinces or federally at different times. And thinking that negotiating with angry mobs is a part of our system of government, I got to say it's not. So don't set the precedent for doing that. The point of a protest is to publicly demonstrate support or opposition for an idea or a policy. And that's what it is. This is not a bilateral or a trilateral or a multilateral, because who knows how many fucking leaders there are in this, in this particular protest or any protest. They're usually not that organized. Who are you sitting down with? There's a forum for discussions like this where people disagree, and it's called, Fed-Prov meetings. It's called meetings with municipal governments or other things. Like, we have a system in democracy where you elect representatives to have these discussions on your behalf. It's not about negotiating with angry mobs. Sorry, guys. Like, it's never going to happen. Tamara Lich, go back home. We're not doing it with you. We're not doing it with, the next 20 people who come from everyone from the radical environmentalists to, the Save the Gay Whales for Jesus folks. It doesn't matter who you are or what your issue is. That's not how we do it.
And even if you were wrong on the principle, which you're not, you're 100% right on the principle, it would also not have effectively diffused it, would it?
No, it wouldn't have done anything.
No, because they had no coordinated leadership that could actually follow through on these things. Just ask Jim Watson, right? Like, he tried and failed spectacularly. And I think, we also
put your fortunes in the hands of Dean French. Look at the long list of people who've succeeded doing that.
What could go wrong, Scott? But I mean, put ourselves back in the moment too, right? The tensions were high. You have to remember, we didn't know what was in those trucks, right? You could have had weapons in those trucks. Frankly, the fact that this all went off without anybody getting seriously hurt is a bit of a miracle. And particularly when we now know quite a bit more about some of the characters involved in organizing this. There were some truly unsavory, dangerous, far-right, extreme people there. And you just, you cannot negotiate with these folks. That's not how we do things. And I think that it would have been a mistake for the Prime Minister to do that, but for all the reasons that Kory's underlined.
All right. Hey, let's swing west. By the way, I did a great hurly-burly this week, if you haven't had a chance to catch it, with Kathleen Petty and Janet Brown about Alberta. And fun stuff going on out there. But let's swing even further west and go out to BC and talk about the new government out there, the new premier. Jordan, why don't you sort of bring us up to speed on David Eby and the new premier?
Yeah, so Friday, David Eby took over. So he's, I think, bringing some fresh energy and determination to that government. So he's somebody who has a long career. He's a lawyer, very connected to various social justice issues, worked on the downtown east side for many years and, in opposition. And as a cabinet minister, he was often handed some of the toughest files. So he took on things like money laundering and housing, sorting out, BC auto insurance. So he's known as a guy who, you can trust with the tough stuff. And I think he's coming in. It's been interesting to see what he started doing right away on Friday, out the gate with an affordability announcement. And then again on Sunday with a crime announcement, around, getting repeat offenders off the street. And then today, I think he's going to be out doing some housing stuff on affordability. So, internally to the party, he's really sent the message that he wants voters to feel that they are getting a difference in their lives. They are feeling the impact of these policy changes right now. They're getting the help that they need from this government. And that's been a pretty clear directive from him. So it's nice to see that energy coming out of the gate with a really pretty tight message focus. I think that he's somebody, for me, it's interesting too, because his experience with some of these tough files isn't academic. He did spend a lot of time on the downtown east side, which is obviously an area that, has a lot of challenges and is in the news right now. And that's not an academic thing for him. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he tackles some of those things. And I think that we also have to see this changeover in the context of the new BC United, right? This is such an interesting moment. You've got the BC New Democrats coming in and really doubling down on their core message around these affordability and cost of living issues on housing. And then you've got BC United having an identity crisis. Who are we?
But is
not only does no one know our leader, but now we're going to have to reintroduce our party to everybody. So I think that juxtaposition is a really interesting one right now.
But Eby is more activist, more urban than Horgan, right? This is going to change the voting coalition a little bit.
I'm not sure it's going to change the voting coalition because, he brings to the table with him all of, the whole caucus that came in with Horgan. And I think what EB does is he's putting the accent on some of his own background and lived experience on this stuff. But I think that, frankly, the fact that they're talking about these affordability, these crime issues, like that's going to resonate in all parts of the province. So I don't see it as a turn from a more of a rural base to an urban one. I think that they are really cognizant of needing to hold those threads together. And you're seeing that signaled by how they're leading off with his media stuff this week.
With apologies to Maurice and the boys, do you remember the second last month, November? My riders this year, just pretenders. The Grey Cup a dream away. November for me is the quintessential Canadian month. Grey Cup is one reason. Another is that it's Diabetes Awareness Month. We've taken a well-deserved measure of national pride in the discovery of insulin, but that was, get ready for it, over a century ago. So on behalf of our sponsor, Diabetes Canada, these are the sobering facts. Diabetes and prediabetes takes a lifelong mental and physical toll on more than 11.7 million people in this country. 1 out of every 3 people in Canada. It costs our healthcare system almost $50 million each day to treat diabetes and its complications. Staggering, really. So it's fantastic that federal government has just tabled the framework for diabetes. Diabetes Canada is on a mission to end diabetes. The tabling of the framework is an important step. But now it's time to implement the framework in 5 key ways. Provide adequate resources so that our communities have access to the supports, medications, and devices for everyone. Measure our progress to create ultimate accountability for every action that's taken. Get better data. That means scaling up and creating new data connection points, as well as increasing the sharing of that data so that we improve how people live. Fund education programs to improve our understanding with tools that are inclusive, culturally appropriate, patient-focused, and work to reduce stigma. Advance creative and impactful research to emphasize innovation in the treatment and management of diabetes and its impact on marginalized communities. It all adds up to millions of lives and billions of taxpayer dollars saved. Diabetes Canada reminds you that November is an excellent time to consider these priorities, and Budget 2023 next spring, the critical time to implement them. Just from a million miles away, which I am in Toronto, a million miles away, it feels interesting because it feels like both parties take a turn away from the center at the same time, in that Horgan had this really strong working class coalition that probably was disappointing downtown Vancouverites to some degree, but was keeping a lot of other people in the tent. EB's somebody that makes the New Democrat base happier, more comfortable. And at the same time, BC United, the Liberals, I can argue this name change both ways because, to be honest, I'm not really sure why any provincial parties are carrying around federal labels anymore. It's just a negative weight that you have to bear that you don't have any control over, and almost invariably is a drag when that party is in power. I think, for instance, the Saskatchewan NDP would do much better if they weren't called the NDP now.
Yes, I was just going to say, sometimes it can be a drag even when they're not in power.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know why any of them do. But on the other hand, this party is essentially a right-wing party. This party is essentially the old SOCRED coalition. It's the anti-NDP party. And I have a suspicion that over the years, a lot of people voted for them because they were tricked by the name. A lot of people in the city, particularly, who might not really want to identify with a right-wing party, felt better about it because it was called the Liberal Party. And for exactly the same reason that the true right-wingers in the province don't want that name, that some centrist voters might have found it a more comfortable place to be. And in any event, to me, it certainly signals I don't want to be that thing anymore, and I want to be more clearly a conservative movement in BC. It's interesting that they're both making decisions like that at roughly the same time.
Yeah, I don't know. I've looked at what EB's start has been, and I agree with your comments on party names, etc., David. But like if you were to have wanted to frame what his first week or so in power have been, it's often running. I would say often running on the spot is sort of more accurate. But interesting just the same in terms of how he's trying to frame these things he's trying to do. Like the rebate for energy bills is so small and inconsequential to be almost meaningless. It starts getting clawed back at roughly half what a family's what the average family income is in Canada. Like this is small potatoes. So that one I think is it's more of a comms exercise than it is a meaningful tangible thing that's going to change anybody's life. And the second is talking about criminal justice reform and getting tough on crime. This is not normal stuff for a left of center party, and especially not a left of center party where the leader is a downtown homelessness / drug policy advocate. Like this seems to me to be shoring up what is I'm sure in their polling a very weak underbelly of his candidacy. Being tough on crime as a provincial leader is a difficult thing to do. You don't control the police forces, especially in the province of BC, because it's RCMP and a mix of RCMP and city police. So you don't control that. So what are you getting tough with? You don't control a criminal code. That's in Ottawa. So, what is it? A bit of direction for 2 years less a day, crimes that you're giving to prosecutors, talking about how you're going to have a better explanation about why you're letting everybody off on bail. Saying you're going to fix the homelessness crisis in downtown Vancouver when you're one of the architects of the very crisis that you're purporting to want to fix.
I'm not sure that's a fair one.
Oh, I think it is. I think for any conservative or right of center voter in the province, they would say that the approach taken by urban progressives in Vancouver is an absolute case study of what not to fucking do. Like this is a problem that is bad and getting worse, not good and getting better.
I read a Paul Wells piece about this, and he had a very different take on it than you're articulating, Kory.
Paul has
quite contradictory.
Take on many things, than I do, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I can't let Kory slide by on that one, because I think that should we leave the realm of partisan speculation and enter the realm of evidence-based policy, it's pretty clear that a lot of the interventions that EB's been involved in over the year are actually the ones that save lives and ultimately move people out of those difficult situations. So,
I agree, but just to be clear, I agree with drug legalization on many fronts. I'm very libertarian in terms of views on that and safety of supply and those things. Like there are evidence-based things around that, but it's also, I think, the more broken windows approach to crime and homelessness and violence or crime related to drug addiction and other things. I think the example of New York City under Giuliani, who's now being discredited for other reasons, but as a mayor, he did quite an effective job of cleaning up the city. And you look at the crisis that you see in cities like San Francisco and others right now. There are a lot of people who are questioning approaches that have been taken in larger urban coastal cities around these issues because they are getting terrible results. And when you're getting terrible results doing something, you should look at places that are getting better results and try to emulate those. That's also evidence-based policy.
Okay, I think we can all agree.
And I think what we're seeing from some of the announcements, and it just speak to the issue around crime. Like, one of the big things the province can do, for example, is invest in some of the mental health interventions that are replacing, police in places where that's appropriate. And so that, they're doing that. They're looking at various things within the court system that have allowed people to get out when they shouldn't be. And so there is stuff that they can do there. And I think that it's interesting. I agree with you that the fact that EB is doing it at the outset is absolutely about sending a signal that there is going to be a response and there's going to be maybe a little bit of a shift on that. So I think it's a smart move on his part.
Well, it's a weak underbelly though, isn't it?
Well, Scott, what's your take? Scott, what's your take?
Well, I think if we're going to invoke evidence-based policies, that we can all agree that every head here should swivel to me, because I'm I am the hardcore butter to the edge policy guy on this panel. Let's not fucking mince words. Like, let's face it, I'm the guy that you turn to on that stuff.
Dr. Reid, as we call you.
Yeah, exactly. Professor knows his shit. Look, I would say...
Like the professor from Gilligan's Island.
Right. Well, we make a transistor radio out of bamboo. Which I still kind of believe must be possible. I would say two contradictory things about the first few days of Premier Eby. One, despite the policy dispute that we hear here, I think what's interesting is that he's beginning with such an energetic, structured, focused set of announcements. Like, he's coming in saying, I'm going to have an agenda. You're not going to be able to miss it. It's going to be absolutely telegraphed. I'm going to follow it up. You may dispute the policies, all that sort of stuff. He's doing crime because it's been a relative source of weakness, I think, for him, to be fair, Kory. Like, I think that's been a knock on him. So even as a former attorney general, so I think that's it. And obviously it's a matter of public policy. I think on that front, you look at it and you got to go, well, he begins with affordability measures. He then says, look, I've got a three-pronged agenda you're going to be hearing about in the days to come, right? Housing, healthcare, and getting tough on crime and public safety. So he's on the numbers. Like, this thing is laser beaming in terms of where people's concerns are at, demonstrating that he's going to be an activist premier, is going to respond to those things. All of that makes a lot of sense. Yes, you then are going to be held up to the test of whether your diagnosis and your prescriptions are adequate, all of those kinds of things. But as a flush of first day's activity, it's been pretty politically impressive, I think. The contradiction I would throw out is, if there's a knock, and I don't want to pretend I know tremendous amounts, but the general knock on Eby has been that he's might be the smartest guy in the room. It certainly is used to flying solo, likes to be a one-man band. And this all does have a little bit of the odor of, I'm going to be the government. I'm going to be the minister of everything in my own government. I'm going to be the face. And you wonder if there's seeds in these first couple of days that tell you what problems might grow later. Like, is it going to be all Eby? Is it going to be is it going to be a little too polished, a little too politically on the nose, everything, and it's going to be him with the smart answer at the right time, and bang, bang, bang. And you run into those kinds of traditional questions about, are you too overexposed? Are you too much the face of everything? Do you then bear the brunt of all responsibility? Do you have any bodies in front of you, between you and the glass window? So I'll be interesting to watch on that. I'm not expert enough on BC politics to know whether any of those concerns are overwhelmingly valid or will bear fruit. But I just looking at it as a pure comms exercise, you can see the strength of what he's doing, but you can also spot a weakness in it. And I wonder if it tells you, it's indicative of a guy who's like, I'm so glad to be leader. I just can't wait to be king, and I wonder if that could be a challenge for him down the road.
No, on the other side, what do you think about the liberal name change thing, in the sense that, you talked about Eby positioning against some of his weaknesses and putting some stuff out there to try to fill in and to try to look like, here's a set of ideas I want you to get behind. BC Liberals appeared to treat their name change as literally just that, just a name change to get the word liberal off the ballot. There's been no attempt to try to imbue that with any new meaning or purpose that I've seen, and nor has he, that I've seen, done anything that might allay the concerns of people that wonder what that means. I mean, he was on the conservative side of the party, and now they've changed the name away. I bet he's got some nervous voters out there who voted for them in the past and who are wondering if that's still the right vehicle for them. And I don't hear them addressing that at all.
Well, I'll weigh in on that a bit if you want. I think they have missed an opportunity to imbue it with some additional meaning. And I think there's some good models, and the best one being the Saskatchewan Party, on what you should be imbuing it with. Or the traditional Liberal approach. It should be a flag wrapping exercise where you can give a nice big warm hug to all the different parts of the province and tell a bit of a backstory and a bit of a narrative and a bit of a history, even if it's viewed as being a bit histrionic, about what this place is about, what this province needs, what's working, what isn't. I think you're seeing a good example of an attempt to do that by Poilievre right now federally. I think we've seen many examples in other successful political parties and rebrandings that have gone on that have tried to do the same. I think that's what he should be doing. I am curious, though, on this tough on crime stuff, though, with EB, to circle back to that again, as to whether you guys think that ever works, because I'm very pessimistic as a conservative campaigner to say that even if things are broken on healthcare, even if people say healthcare as a conservative is like the number one issue, if you go out and put that as one of your main planks, no matter what you say, no matter how beautiful and wonderful and well-crafted your policies are around it, you're probably losing that. If
Kory, my goal was always, let's do everything that we need to do on the crime file to ensure that we don't have to talk about it in the writ.
Right. Yeah. So
right?
That would be
because if we're talking about crime at the end of the day, people are going to vote conservative.
Yeah. No, that's what I think too. But like I went and looked at the government comms documents that they put out around this, like, and the way that they put it and the way they framed it, a tough on crime agenda, like it was like a getting tough on repeat offenders. When you looked under the hood of that, of course, it's nothing of the sort. Like, it's not doing any of that. It's all bullshit. But the comms framing of it is there. I think it's a spectacular misfire on their part to be putting that in the window that way. And we'll see whether they continue to do so or not. But if I were Falcone and BC United, I'd be coming out hard saying, yes, yeah, we do want to talk about that. Let's lift up the hood of this policy initiative and look at how fraudulent it is. Because that's the conversation I'd want to have. I'd want to say to every other community in BC, hey, do you want to?
Yeah, but if it's a vulnerability, Kory, he's got to seal it off now. Jordan,
well, that's it. Yeah, I think that EB's out there. He's doing the inoculation work that he needs to do. And like, to your point about the branding on this, I mean, this is not actually foreign for Provincial New Democrats. The Manitoba NDP held government for many, many years with policies and messaging around being tough on crime. It was quite successful for them.
But do you really think David Eby, like the
judgment on David Eby, and it's a different,
Street?
What the BC NDP is doing is different than what the Manitoba NDP did. But what I'm saying is that it's not a message that's unknown among Provincial New Democrats, and I think it has been successful. But for this to really for it to be a true weakness, he's doing it, he's shoring it up right now, but you've got the BC United out there, like, nobody knows who their leader is. Like, they're not telling any story with their rebrand. So all of this they have to be seen in conversation with each other. And right now, EB's out there driving a crisp, clear message that includes a strong affordability piece that's going to speak to people both in urban centers and in rural areas. And he's really also making a critical pitch against BC United, saying that in this moment of unique economic crisis, and we're in pandemic year 1,000,000 and life is getting harder, you can't afford to have BC United in charge, because they're going to cut the supports that you count on. They're going to cut the services you rely on. You're going to wait longer for healthcare and so on. And I actually think it's a pretty potent mix for EB. Meanwhile, you've got, BC United wandering around wondering, who are we? So I actually like that as an opening week for him. I think it's strong. I don't think that they're going to take a hit for shoring up their weak spot. Alrighty.
Scott, you got any last words on this before we call Gordon Pinston in?
Just quickly, I would say for BC United, I think there's some risk going on there right now. In addition to everything that people have talked about, I think there's a real risk that not just that they appear to be just a pure conservative movement, a pure return to SoCred, but maybe that they are. And that they'll be left with no political territory other than cut taxes. That's all we're about. That's all anybody will have time to figure out that we're about. And, maybe that'll be the right answer come the next election, but it might not be. And so whether it's crime, whether it's finding out some way to talk about the healthcare that doesn't drive voters into the arms of the NDP, I think they've got to define themselves around a set of issues. And not just have people say, well, I just will now make assumptions about what you are by default. And I just will assume that your default recipe for everything is cut taxes.
Right. I agree with that, actually. All right, Mr. Pinsent, summon the troops.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Okay, who's first today with the Hey You? Jordan,
I'll go
I'm
first.
calling on you, Jordan.
All right. Go ahead.
I always go first. All right. I was giving Kory a moment there. Okay, so my Hey You, I'm mixed feelings about this Hey You because I don't like talking about the Greens, but holy hell. My Hey You is going out to Elizabeth May. Please retire. Please stop. This is wild.
She just received a public mandate.
I'm sure that's what we can call it, Scott.
A resounding public mandate.
The last three people in the Green Party got around a table and grumbled and said, I guess. So
Man.
she's back. Guys, this is insane. And I feel like, I don't want the Greens to be successful, but if I did, I would look at this and say, wow, this is really stunningly bad. And this co-leader business, like, I wish you luck with it, guys. So my Hey You goes out to Elizabeth May. You got to know when to stop.
It's over. All right. Kory.
Well, I was going to build on our BC conversation. My Hey You would be to Kevin Falcon to say, take a good look at the Saskatchewan party. If I were to say if there's one example about how you launch one of these things, it's certainly that one. It's the most successful iteration that we've had, and really use the opportunity to define what this new party is, to use it as an exercise to grow your electoral coalition by reaching out and talking to some of the people who you think could be a part of that storyline, and give them a big warm hug, build them as a part from the get-go. It's an opportunity to create your own history about what it is this thing is about and who you're looking to help. But it's a time-limited opportunity, as they say. So no time like the present. Get on it if you want to actually change the outcome of the next election.
Excellent. Scott.
Last night, the Walt Disney Company issued a press release announcing that longtime former CEO Bob Iger would be taking over from newly installed for the past 2 years, Bob Chapek. Chapek held a news conference. He held a quarterly call earlier this past week where he announced that the streaming service Disney Plus had lost $1.5 billion in the fourth quarter. That was his Waterloo. He appeared to be cavalier about how weak their streaming service was doing. His board revolted. The street revolted. They turned to the safe hands of Bob Iger, and Bob Chapek is out. I say to Canadians, my Hey You is to all the skeptics, all the cynics, all those who are disinterested in politics and believe that nothing can be achieved by politics. All of this occurs not just mere days, maybe a week after Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland calls on people to cut the cord on Disney to surrender that subscription. You want to think that politics don't matter? You think our politicians don't matter? You think Canada isn't heard on the world stage? You don't think our leaders have influence? Well, why don't you fucking ask Bob Chapek? He thinks Chrystia Freeland has plenty of influence.
Maybe she's a better communicator than we thought.
Another great diagnosis from Dr. Reid.
Yeah, the power. All right, my Hey You goes out to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Premier Smith, I had leading Alberta pollster Janet Brown on the Hurley Burley last week, and she explained to me for an hour how you were losing. But you appeared to be unconvinced by that, and you decided to go out and make it certain. Because after that podcast, you announced that you would encourage Albertans to start saving for their healthcare costs so that they could afford to pay for it when they need it, because that's what's going to happen. And I'm just going to tell you, that's not going to fly even in Alberta. Like, that is just, you've touched whatever rail can't be touched there, and an unlikely victory for you has become already much less likely.
You're not even mentioning the fact, David, that she also decided to just mention off the side of the table that she's of Cherokee descent, considers herself to be of mixed race and an Indigenous person. Ask Michelle Latimer and Joseph Biden how that fucking story goes for you. Not the issue you want to take on.
No, but she didn't even appear to care that she'd lied about it. She just blew past that. Just, she's bad in a lot of ways, but this healthcare thing is going to be her Waterloo for sure. All right, everybody. Thank you for being with us this week. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsors, CN and Diabetes Canada. Thank Scott and Jordan and Kory for being with us again. And I'd like to thank the Toronto Argonauts for a big show yesterday. I'd like to thank Elton for his big show last night. And Thank you all for watching and listening. We'll be back next week with more Curse of Politics. Oh, by the way, Cole Caulfield can really play hockey.